was the creepiest glitch in the Matrix you've experienced? Story 1. 10 years ago, I was returning home from a road trip with two friends. I received a phone call from my parents asking when we would be arriving, and I explained that we were about 25 minutes away. About a minute later, we came around a bend. It was a full moon. We could see the reflection from a lake below us, and other than that, the road was completely empty. Suddenly, everything went completely dark in the car. No lights from the dash or gauges or headlights on the road. The music also stopped and restarted at the beginning of the CD we were listening to. There was now a vehicle pulled over by the police about 1/4 mile in front of us that hadn't been there a split second before. I assumed I had dozed off for just a second, as it was late. I thought it was still quite peculiar though. After about a minute, the driver of the car tuned the music all the way down and said, "Did that just happen to anyone else?" The other passenger in the back seat sat forward abruptly and exclaimed, "I thought I just fell asleep." We then realized that the clock in the car was reading an hour later than it had just a minute before. To keep ourselves from freaking out, we decided the car had possibly had a momentary electrical failure and reset the clock to an odd time, turned off the dash lights, headlights, and gauges, and restarted the CD player. But when we arrived home 25 minutes later, we were 1 hour late. I am missing an hour of my life, and to this day I had no idea how it happened. Yeah, the worst part is that anyone you tell that to, they're just gonna think you're crazy. But you know you're not crazy, because that happened to your friends too. I would always joke like this with my friends. I'm like, could you imagine if we just like, I don't know, for example, like we just saw like a flying pig, you know? There's two of you see a flying pig. Like, you guys will obviously not think you're crazy, because like, what are the odds of you guys having both a schizophrenic episode at the same exact time, not being diagnosed for it? But no one will ever believe you. They just think you're playing a punk on them. You're playing a little joke. Story 2. I swear to all the gods, a similar glitch in time happened to me. However, in my case, I was walking to the hallway from my bedroom, and as I got about 6 feet down the hallway, I was seamlessly transported back to the hallway entrance. This was no deja vu event, at least not like I've ever had before or since. I distinctly remember physically walking into my hallway when I suddenly start from the entrance again. I nearly threw up and crapped myself at that very moment. It literally made me sick and scared. I also remember what happened about a second or so before this teleportation glitch. My body started to softly vibrate as I were some just rusty robot. If you can imagine the low-powered vibration of console controllers, but your entire body doing it, that's what it felt like. It lasted for about 2 seconds, right until I teleported. It was somewhat painful to move in that state. I never mentioned it to anyone because, well, obvious reasons. Yeah, you can never tell that story to anyone. They're gonna think you probably like had a stroke or something. No one's ever gonna believe you, unfortunately. That's why you have Reddit. Because people believe everything on Reddit. Story 3. When I was a teenager, I had 2 really intense dreams one night. The first one was about an online friend of mine calling me to say she'd broken up with her boyfriend, and I sang a few lines of Seal's "Don't Cry" to her over the phone. The second dream was finding a real-life friend dead body floating in her bathtub. I didn't think anything of it up until I logged online that evening, and the online friend came online to tell me her boyfriend broke up with her. I immediately asked if I could call her, and she said no. I remember thinking that it meant something, like I could change it. Not long after, my phone rang, and it was real-life friend from the dream calling me. I was completely freaked out at this point, but talked to her normally. She was just talking about school and crap. Up until I realized I heard a harsh splash in the background. I asked her, "Are you in the tub?" And when she said yes, I felt like my heart had stopped. I asked her, "What did you do?" She didn't answer me right away. And then after a very long pause, she told me she'd taken an entire bottle of pills and chased it with mushrooms and vodka. She'd gotten scared, waiting for it to hit her. So she called me so she'd hear someone's voice. I hung up and called 911. By the time they got there, she was unconscious, but alive. Today, she's a mom to a beautiful little girl. And she's okay. Story 4. I have a sleep tracking app on my phone that has a setting for lucid dreaming. It will start saying, "You are dreaming," repeatedly in a woman's voice with a bit of an echo. I was at work one day when I started hearing the voice randomly every few minutes or so. I checked my phone, and as soon as the screen turned, I woke up in my bed and the sun was rising. A bit freaked out, I went to take a shower. Then on my way to work, I started to hear the voice again through the radio. When I turned my car off, a bit freaked out again. I once more woke up in my bed as the sun was rising. This happened about 3 or 4 more times, all at different times of the day. I didn't trust reality for about a week after that, and still refused to use that particular setting for the app. Alright, I actually got some advice for this. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you're kind of scared of reality, you're not sure if reality is real, you're not sure if you're dreaming or not, there's a thing you can perform called a reality check. I will give you 2 examples of reality checks that are very easy to do. Number 1, if you take 2 fingers and try to push it through your hand. If you're not dreaming, you're just gonna look stupid. But if you are dreaming, these fingers will go through your hand and you'll right away become conscious and understand you're dreaming. My favorite example that I personally use and works very well is if you plug your nose and you try to breathe, in real life, you will not be able to breathe. But in a dream, when you have your nose plugged, you will still be able to breathe through your nose. This is a very trippy sensation, but it's really cool. Story 5. Not creepy, but so vivid and distinct that I still think about it years later. I had a subjectively long, involved dream where I was a vendor in a fish market. I remember getting up early, dressing, doing a whole morning routine, going to get tea, heading out to the docks, buying fish, loading them in a cart, and going to get ice. Then haggling for ice, buying some less fresh fish while I was at it, then going to a market to my stall, setting up and selling fish all day. It was so real. I talked to friends, smoked nasty cigarettes, haggled customers, ate lunch, had tea, and just lived through the day. At the end of the day, I cleaned up, counted my cash, paid the stall rent, went home, cooked some of the fish I had and sold, sling with some veggies and rice that I traded for. I drank more tea, relaxed for a while, then drew a hot bath, soaked and smoked some more cigs, then went to bed. The next morning, I woke up refreshed, ready to go down to the docks to buy fresh catch, except I was in my house, next to my wife. Truck parked outside, and it was a Saturday. No work. My wife and I were getting geared up to go skiing in Oregon, and the car was already packed. Weird thing was, in the dream, I was single and a smoker. I'm not. And the whole long dream had been fluent Chinese, the effortless kind of fluency that only comes from a lifetime of speaking it. Oh, and I had been Chinese. I'm a big hairy white dude, somewhat fluent in Spanish, and I know a little bit of Russian, but I've never. It was just weird. I've never worked in a fish market. I wonder who I was. I wonder what that was. I don't know why, but this reminds me of that one anime movie. It's called Your Name, I think, where they kind of switch bodies. Like, I'm not going to say much about the movie, but they switch bodies. It's very interesting because this is essentially what kind of happened is he just kind of lived a different life and switched bodies. It's really weird too, because like it's hard to believe this kind of thing exists, but it's like, there's so many stories like this, ghost stories and all these things. It's like, is there really that many liars in the world, or is there more that we just don't know? Story 6. This happened back in college. I was driving home from my cabin in northern Wisconsin through the Indian reservation. There was a man on the side of the road sort of limping along, and I pulled over and asked if he was okay. He said yes, he was fine. He just needed to get home because his wife decided she still loved him. They had a fight. I asked the man where home was, and surprisingly, it was the same city where I went to college, about 2 hours away. I offered him a ride. He didn't talk much. He was tired. When he got into town, he started giving me directions. Just down here, it's close, he said. Take a left at the lights. Okay, I said. Right here, he said, pointing after the white truck. Here? I pulled in the driveway. Yes. Shut up, I said. What? He asked. He was grinning, like he knew what I was going to say next. I used to live here, I told him. You don't say. Yes, upstairs, apartment number 3. Yes, that's ours. Now, he was smiling ear to ear. Small world, he said. He thanked me for the ride and got out of my car and walked through the front door of my old apartment building. I know it's just a coincidence, but it was one of the strangest moments of my life. Yeah, honestly, if that was me in that situation, I would be convinced this guy was about to murder me. Like, I'd be convinced this guy did a bunch of research on me and brought me to my house, my old house, as a sick game to murder me. I don't know why this guy was so nonchalant about it. I'd be like, there is no way this actually happened. I don't believe in coincidences. This guy's gonna kill me. Story 7. I got a call from a police officer telling me if I didn't pay some old fines within a week, he would come arrest me. The total was $267.63. It was about 2 weeks before Christmas, so I was really sweating it. The very next day, I got a check in the mail for $267.63 for overpaid child support throughout the year. Craziest, most explainable thing I've ever had happen to me. Story 8. I was heading home with my dad. We stopped at a drive-thru. I started feeling more and more anxious for no reason, to the point where it makes me lightheaded and sick to my stomach. We have to wait a little bit ahead because they gave us the order wrong. So I sit there feeling like crap, and it suddenly comes to me an urge to call my brother. He was trying to call us. He was in a car accident. No one died. Some got seriously bruised. He was only shaken. I told him to shut up and get as far away from the car as possible. He didn't understand but followed through. Trying to call some of his buddies, and I could hear them calling him a wuss. Him giving up and getting far, and then a loud noise. People shouting. After the whole crap was over, he told me what happened. His drunk friend tried to impress some girls in the car, hit the gas, drifted, and hit the bottom of the car on some rocks, completely effing up the engine. They stood near the car, the driver still inside, trying to turn the engine back on. The hood burst in flames, and the car started to burn fast. The driver managed to get away, but got severely hurt. Some of the guys and girls who stood around were hurt and burned too, but not as bad as the driver. My brother was the only one with light bruises from the whole thing. He told me that when I ordered him to get away from the car, he was in front of it, inches from the hood. I never experienced anything like this before and after. Just this once. It's just an effing weird memory. I don't remember what I was thinking. I remember it like watching a movie and seeing myself in everything from an outside angle. Story 9. I have a few, but this one stands out in particular. I was watching a SkyTrain in one particular city about 15 minutes from where I get off. While I wait, there is a woman with glazed eyes asking people for money. She came up to me, stopped briefly, and asked, "Excuse me, could you spare me some money? My brother is in the hospital, and I'd like some money to buy him some flowers." That's rich, I thought. Drug addicts are getting more and more obvious with their lines. "Here's $5. Gave it to her without even looking her in the face, convinced of her intentions. Anyways, my train pulls up and I get on. I look through the glass at her walking around asking others for money as the train pulls away. The train arrives at the station 15 minutes later, and I walk down and out to the bus stop. There is only one bus direction I'm going, and just my luck is they're waiting when I get off the train. So on the bus, I hop and wait for the bus driver to finish reading his paper before the doors close and we embark down the highway. About 5 to 10 minutes traveling, the driver pulls over for a routine stop. The doors open, and to my complete astonishment, the woman from the SkyTrain walks into the bus, a dozen roses in hand. She looks me right in the eyes, and as she walks past to take her seat. How in the blue hell did she get there? I took the train before her. I watched her at the train stop from inside as we pulled away. I went over a river. I caught the first and only bus going this particular direction. And not only did she beat me there, she had time to go to the store and buy a dozen roses. To this day, I have no idea how this happened. Alright, I have one guess. I might sound pretty crazy, but this is the only logical explanation I can actually think for this story. If you really think about it, like physically, this guy shows very clearly it's physically impossible for this woman to be here. So what's another explanation how we can explain the existence of this person being here? Well, I would say the only way to explain this is a twin. Maybe this woman had a twin, and this twin just so happened to have roses too. Maybe they were trying to run some kind of scam, and she had flowers for whatever reason. Who knows? The only thing I do feel is it's very possible she has a twin in the same area. Story 10. It happened in early 2000 when I was working at a juvenile detention center in a small town in Oklahoma as a corrections officer. I was working nights at the time and went to work at 9 p.m. This one night when I arrived for work, my supervisor looked confused and asked me what I was doing there. I said, "I work tonight." And he said, "But they said you called in a few hours ago saying that you were sick." I was a bit confused and said, "It must have been someone else," and they got the message wrong. After everyone showed up for work that night, it was a bit more weird. But we carried on as usual and assigned everyone their places for the night. I went to work in the control room where I usually work. The control room is the center of the prison that has direct control over the cameras, doors, phones, and everything. After I relieved the guard on duty and settled in for the night, I looked at the message that said I called in. It said I had called at 6:50 and said that I had gotten sick while cleaning up after the storm. There had been a storm the night before and it was a bit bad, but not anything that I had to go out to clean up. It was truly weird. The supervisor came into the control about that time. He was also a friend of mine outside of work, and we started talking about it and how odd it was. I decided to call my wife at home and tell her about it while he was still sitting there. I picked up the phone and dialed. After 2 rings, a man picked up the phone and with a raspy voice said, "Hello." I did not know what to say for a few seconds. I looked at the phone to make sure I dialed the right number, and I had. After a few seconds, the person said, "Hello," again in the same raspy voice. I said, "Hello, who is this?" "This is Taylor. Who is this?" The person said. My head started spinning because my name is Taylor also. I said in almost a scream, "Where's Ann?" He said, "Ann's in bed. Who's this?" I dropped the phone and told my supervisor to ring me out. I had to get home, and I took off towards the door. I could hear Dave pick up the phone behind me and say, "Hello," followed soon after by, "What the F?" rather loudly. I ran to my car and drove home faster than what was legal, my mind racing the entire time. I busted through the door and my wife was sitting watching TV and was shocked at me being home. I asked her who was there, and she said no one has been here. After a rather long talk with my wife, I went to call the person to tell them what was going on, but the phone was dead. I went back to work, and when I came in, Dave was acting weird and asked me, "How the hell are you doing this?" He told me that when I left, he picked up the phone and the person on the other end sounded like me. He kind of freaked out and hung up on the phone. A minute later, as he could see my car leaving the parking lot, I had called back from home and asked what the F was going on. He said I was a bit irritated and said I was sick and did not feel like playing these games and was telling him to stop prank calling me and hung up. After convincing him I had no idea what was going on, we went back to work. Later, I found out that the phone line for my area had been knocked down the night before by the storm. This is absolutely the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. Story 11. I've experienced deja vu a couple of times when I was younger, and while that is certainly freaky, nothing beats its opposite, Jamas vu, which I experienced twice during a period of work-related stress a few years ago. On both occasions, I was driving my car in perfectly familiar surroundings near my home, when suddenly I had no idea where I was or where I was going. It was like being instantly teleported to a foreign country. It only lasted seconds, but very creepy nonetheless. Until it happened to me, I had no idea that this even existed. Story 12. This happened when I was 11. I still remember it like it was yesterday. My grandfather was getting old and had been in and out of the hospital a few times that year. At that moment, he had been in the hospital for probably 2 days. We had gone into the hospital to visit him, where I gave him a big hug and told him I loved him and would see him tomorrow. That night, I went to bed and had the most beautiful dream. My grandpa came into my room and sat in the rocking chair in the corner. He invited me into his lap and told me he was going away for a while and that someday he would see me again. I shouldn't worry because everything was okay and he wasn't in any pain. I smiled at him and gave him a big hug and told him I understood. I then looked over at my brother sleeping in the bunk below me and asked my grandpa if we should wake him up and tell him. When I turned back around to get a response from my grandpa, he was gone. I ran to the window to look out onto the front yard. There he was waving at me. He whispered, "Go tell your mom and dad exactly what I told you." I looked back at the door to my room and then back at the front yard, and he was gone. I immediately woke up, ran to my parents' room and turned on the light. I told them exactly what Grandpa had told me. They told me it was just a dream and to go back to bed. I told them exactly what Grandpa told me again. Frustrated, it was 2 a.m. They told me to go back to bed and we would talk about it in the morning. Just then, the phone rang. It was the hospital. My mother started sobbing. Grandpa had passed. At that moment, she just sat there with my father, staring at me. I still remember their faces. They both looked at each other, then me, then each other, and finally smiled and stopped crying. They gave me a big hug and told me they loved me and to go back to bed. They ended up going to the hospital that night and my aunt came over to watch us, but we have never talked about that night since. In fact, I don't think I've ever written about it, which explains the tears rolling down my cheeks right now. Wow, that was liberating, and I'm glad other people had these type of things happen. Story 13. During a spinal tap procedure, I was put under. While under the anesthetics, I had what I can only explain as an out-of-body experience, seeing as how my viewpoint was from above my body looking down on the procedure. I watched the whole thing and saw the doctor knock my Game Boy off the tabletop while walking by. Batteries ejecting from the fall. One fell in sight and he picked it up, but the other was next to the front left wheel under the bed out of his view. But not mine. I woke up groggy and told him where my other battery was, and he was shocked when he found it there. To this day, it still weirds me out. Okay, obviously, like, scientifically speaking, there's no scientific proof that drugs can give you, helicopter view of your life. You can see stuff without seeing stuff from your eyes. But it's very interesting because I feel like out-of-body experiences are very common under the use of drugs. Like, I'm not going to say what I've done, but I've done a certain very visual drug in my past, and I've had out-of-body experiences too. And they're very trippy. But the weird thing is, according to this person's story, he was actually able to see a Game Boy. But I don't know, let's play devil's advocate real quick. Let's just try to understand this. Like, maybe there's a scientific reason to why he was able to do this. My guess is maybe he might have heard the battery fall. In some reason, his brain just comprehended it as... So basically, just kind of explain it better, is his brain heard where the battery fall, but since he was under drugs, it comprehended it from a helicopter view, an out-of-body experience kind of perspective. But that was all imagination. But him hearing it caused that imagination, which turned out to be accurate. That's the only reason I can think of why this would be possible. Not, then I don't know. Story 14. I used to live in North Carolina a few years ago and still regularly go back to visit friends. While I was there, my friends and I, who are now in college or are graduated, ran into somebody who we had known. Although I didn't know her very well back in high school, a few days later I flew back home to Texas. The next day I went to the grocery store and was walking down the aisle when I see a girl that looks exactly the same. I did the biggest double take I've ever done. Being 1,400 miles away from the city where I knew the girl lived, it seemed absolutely impossible. As it turns out, after I called my friend about it, the girl I had been talking to in North Carolina has an identical twin in Texas who just happens to live in the same city as me. For a couple hours, I thought it was crazy though. Okay, do you guys remember the story with the bus, with the flowers and all that? Does my twin theory seem as crazy now? Like, think about it. I think a twin is more likely to live with their other twin to be in this relatively the same location than they are to be 1,400 miles away. So looking at it, I feel like the bus story is it's very possible that it was just a twin. And I really do believe that even more now after reading this story. Story 15. When I was like 10 or 11, I was going to the beach with my aunt and her friends. There were 2 cars of us. To get there, we had to go through a very large industrial area. We didn't know the direction, so our car was following the other. Suddenly, they did an unexpected turn, and so our driver had to take a sharp bend. In that moment, we heard a very clear, loud voice inside the car saying, laughing, "Sharp bend, The driver immediately hits the brakes. We looked at each other, puzzled. We all recognized it as a voice not belonging to any of us. In the very same time, we noticed that the other car has stopped as well. The other driver got out of the car with a scared face and shouted to us, Did you hear that as well?" They heard the very same thing inside their car. The area around was full deserted. Story 16. As I type this, I am already feeling deja vu. I've always wanted to share this part of my life with someone, but I've never been able to. So, I'll just tell a bunch of people on the internet. One day I was walking to work and all of a sudden had an urge to walk a different path than usual. I work downtown in the big city. It was a strange spur-of-the-moment urge to walk in a different way that changed my life forever. I turned into an alley I'd never seen before. As I remembered it, I made it about 15 feet or so when an actual glitch happened. Everything in my mind scrambled. I felt like I didn't have a body anymore. Just that, I was a semi-conscious entity floating through some weird dimension. All of a sudden, in the array of different colors and shapes, a vision came to me. It was a bunch of strange-looking people that in my mind resembled businessmen in suits. They looked startled and panicked that I could see them. One of the people made a quick movement and everything turned to black. When I regained normality, I was on a completely different street. It was the same street that I always used to walk to work. I felt sick and severely disturbed/depressed. I've never done any hard drugs, never experienced any hallucinations, never had done anything like this to happen to me before. The weird thing is, when the glitch was correcting itself, I could see all those people watching me like a caged animal. I had the feeling that I knew I was being controlled. It still bothers me very much to this day. My friend, I would try to get diagnosed for schizophrenia just to see if you have it. I would see if a doctor would diagnose you with that because that's just not normal. Listen, I can tolerate ghost stories and all that, but seeing like businessmen and all those, oh man, I didn't even know what to tell this person. Obviously, I'm not trying to like discredit anyone's stories here. I just like looking at these with a very skeptical perspective. But yeah, I mean, honestly, if that was me, I'd probably go to the doctors immediately. Story 17. I don't know if this is a source of consolation or not, but a long time ago I had a conversation with an old workmate who described much the same thing. The detail is hazy, but he said one day he's in his house when he felt a sudden need to go outside and stand on his lawn. He claimed it was the strongest, clearest feeling ever, and on doing so he experienced a sort of wobble. He just said everything was screwed up for a moment, and he experienced a feeling of detachment/outsideness. When it passed, he tuned to go back inside. Now, while talking to me, he got quite upset at this point and asked me not to think him crazy. But he said the next thing he saw was his car parked in the street, and it was the same model/registration, but a different color. He was so thrown at this, and then more so because then his wife came out to ask what he was doing. And he said he realized she was in all appearance his wife, but somehow not his wife. He said from that point on, she liked foods she claimed to have ate before, and sometimes brought up memories. But the thing is, he had zero relation to these memories they had done in the past. He said things like his route to work was still the same, but somehow different. He said there were buildings on that way that either he had missed in the 6 years he'd driven past them 5 days a week, or had just appeared overnight. He even said some people he remembered from other departments and work had just vanished, and asking about them brought total incomprehension from other people. He was a totally regularly healthy guy, but he said he measured his life in relation to that afternoon. There were things that happened before the change and everything afterwards. He went to say he was now living his life with a feeling that about 15% of it had spontaneously changed that afternoon. We moved on and drifted apart since then, different jobs, but I've never really felt so sure about the permanence of reality ever since.